very good day to everyone out there tuning into this session. My name is Lillian Lee, and I'm honored to be your moderator for this panel discussion on increasing the longevity of the esports athletes. First of all, we'd like to give thanks to the Global Esports Federation for providing us the opportunity to partake in this exciting conference proudly held in my hometown, Singapore. With us today, we have two very inspiring speakers and leaders in the health and wellness space. They are Associate Professor Mo Durrani and Dr. Melita Mo. Professor Mo is the founding managing director of Plano and adjunct associate professor at the Duke NUS Medical School in Singapore. Dr. Melita is a quadruple-based certified physician and chair of the Health and Wellness Commission of the Global Esports Federation and team physician for professional esports athletes. Very glad to have both of you here with us today to share ideas within this rapidly growing gaming industry. And without further ado, let's get right into this. So, Professor Mo, now tell us a little bit, what is the background behind this particular topic that we are discussing today, and why? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I think that can be answered quite briefly and quickly. If you haven't heard of esports, you're probably living under a rock. And I'm sure you probably know someone who's gaming and potentially someone who's a professional athlete in the space. So we know that the fan base is growing rapidly. And esports was not something that was just developed yesterday or last year. It's been around for quite some time. But with the digitalization of the world and advancements in technology, you'll see that esports is also moving in that direction of becoming included in all mainstream sports, and justifiably so. So the fan base is sort of creeping over 600 million. That's about 10% of the world's population. And the gamers in the world is nearing about 3 billion gamers. That's a serious number, and that's more than 1/3 of the world's population. And from an economic perspective, we know that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. In this year, they're expected to exceed 1 billion, and that will double next year. And so there's an economic attractiveness to this. And if you look at the prize money, they're giving some of these professional athletes in the space of, football and boxing and NBA and so forth a run for their money, with multiple millions of dollars in prize money. So there's incentivization for youngsters to be inspired by these professional athletes, also aspiring to become esport athletes themselves. Now, I think when you look at the lifespan of professional esports athletes, it's quite small. It's sort of around the 4 years. But what's important to notice and to recognize is that it's not when you see them on a media snippet or when you see them sort of playing in a professional sport. There was a huge amount of lead up to become a professional esports athlete. So in actual fact, even though their lifespan is about 4 years as a competitive athlete, there would have been at least a decade of training. And why we want to come in, particularly with Melita's expertise, is to sort of understand and be able to intervene in a comprehensive and coordinated way to ensure that health is at the forefront of all stakeholders' minds, because we know sedentary behavior is quite attached and almost a necessity with this type of sport, with sitting down and with reduced physical inactivity. That could produce a huge amount of stress and also and create, reduced opportunities to be outside, reduced opportunities to engage in physical activity with this competitive sort of nature. But what we're going to demonstrate today is that you can have your regular breaks, you can engage in outdoor activity, you can engage in eye health exercises and so forth, and still be an incredibly competitive esports athlete. So I think, in summary, with the increase in uptake, the younger age of uptake of this sport, the commercial attractiveness, also with the world connected, and I don't want to take anyone's limelight away, but with the emergence of the metaverse, which tells me there's going to be more sedentary behavior, and it's already one of the top 10 leading causes of death and disability, we must intervene. So it's important. And we're here to work with the community. We're not rallying against the community by any means. And I think Melita will agree with me there.
No, absolutely. And I think, Mom, when we're talking about, you were talking about this short lifespan, we know that for a professional esports athlete, they really retire around the age of 22 to 24, which is, when you think about what you may have been doing at the age of 22 or 24, their career is over. And now it's starting to talk about doing something different. But I'm so glad that you are talking about the sedentary lifestyle, because what we are starting to see in the community is more of a shift to something that's fairly new, called active esports or virtual esports. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that too, because that is a way to still keep people engaged in esports while we are increasing and actively participating in an exercise in a sport. So it's shifting. So we are welcome to all of these new things that are coming in the industry for sure.
Fantastic.
Very good insights into the world of esports from a health perspective. Now, with both of you being renowned, health advocates of healthy lifestyles, and I really want to ask both of you which health elements, need to be considered in this aspect.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and if you don't mind, Melita, I might give the perspective of the eyes. And we understand that there's multiple domains or facets of health that needs to be considered. And again, this is not isolating esports athletes. This is a consideration that's been embedded in other sports as well. So when I talk about the esports athletes, because it's emergent and growing very quickly, this is why we're placing so much attention. So we're not singling out by any means. So we know that there's the nutrition aspect, the physical activity, the general health, the mental health, and the list goes on. Even when there's others athletes preparing for competition, you will find now that it's not unusual for teams to have, for athletes to have teams of up to 15 different specialties, just to ensure longevity of their career and to ensure optimal sort of performance. So what from an eye health perspective, we know that there's a scarcity of data or positives of research in this space. But with some of the research that we do have, we know that there's more than about 50% that are complaining of symptoms related to digital eye strain and even myopia itself. And the list goes on. And these are not conditions that can just be simply corrected with glasses and contact lenses, because if they progress, they can lead to more sinister or sight-threatening situations where the vision loss or blindness can't be reversed. So I think it's important, and the good thing is that a lot of these eye health elements can be modified. Hence the title of this presentation. So we got to be mindful of and continuous is a keyword. Continuous and uninterrupted screen time. Where they're not looking away, they're not looking out in distance. And sadly, we're not built or created, whether you believe in a God or evolution, for our eyes to be fixated on a screen for extended periods of time uninterrupted, as you wouldn't be expected to be flexing your muscles and holding them for several hours a day. It's just not the way we're built. However, you can, if you just give yourself a bit of a break every now and then, walk around and so forth. So this continuous screen time is an issue. The face to screen, particularly if you've got uncorrected refractive error or myopia, you would tend to get a bit closer. Sorry to sort of scare you with the close-up of my face. But face to screen distance is also something that needs to be considered. The lighting conditions, the environment. Of course, we've all heard of the blue light emitting through the screens. Vision and body ergonomics is a topic in itself. And just your posture to avoid sort of neck and wrist and thumb injuries that are quite prevalent nowadays. The symptoms that I spoke to you about with the digital eye strain is a condition also known as computer vision syndrome, and it's dryness, it's blurred vision, it's glare, discomfort. So you could imagine if you were to address these, and they can be addressed very easily, or prevent them, you won't even have to, the player or the athlete won't have to suffer from these symptoms. So you can see that they're getting a competitive edge here. And I'll talk about how we implement these in a controlled and coordinated manner where the athlete takes control themselves. And that's what's quite important. And the prolonged fixation, you imagine the strenuous eye movements, we call them saccades. If you're looking at one screen and I'm going to be honest, I'm not very good at gaming, but I did give it a shot and I'm incredibly impressed. Wow. And they have every right to be called an athlete. If you have a look, I did do some YouTubing and watch these guys play. My Lord, it's very fine detail. It's moving, and there's sort of their fixation, hand-eye coordination is unbelievable. Of course, the lack of distance viewing, moving, standing, and so forth, myopia and reduced blinking. The list actually goes on. So there are eye health elements where it's behavior that can actually alleviate these. There are eye health elements where knowledge can prevent these. There are eye health elements where regular and timely eye examinations can also address this. Currently, there is no universal eye health gaming framework that's been adopted or implemented. And this is something that we want to work closely with Melita and the team to be able to introduce this, to give athletes the best shot possible in being the best and prolonged beyond their mid-20s and surely into their 30s. Melita, did you want to add?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, we've touched on the eye. So, Mo has certainly covered that. But I think when we're looking about and talking about gaming and esports, it is very important to really identify that difference, because we may be a casual gamer, which you may play maybe 4 to 6 hours a week, versus an esports athlete. And esports is organized competitive video gaming. And so when you are participating in esports, you really are at that professional level. So if you can think about, your most famous footballer, that's a competitive professional level athlete. And that's what we think about when we talk about esports. So esports behaviors are certainly very different than when we're just talking about gaming or the casual gamer. But for a professional esports athlete, they're on that screen for 16 and 18 hours a day. And Mo was just talking about this continuous, time with your eyes. Of course, at some point of that time, they're getting up to move around, but a large part of that is practicing, or what they call grinding. And so when we look at the holistic esports athlete and gamer, which really goes over to anyone that's working on their laptops at home. Like, we all have found ourselves over the past 2 years. And so most people, at least in the United States pre-pandemic, your average corporate America worker is on the computer 7 to 8 hours a day. So even if you are not a gamer and you are watching this, you are on the screen, just like you're watching us right now. So these are tips that we certainly want to take away. But when we talk about health and wellness from a large perspective, we always center around cognitive wellness or brain wellness. And I feel like there's this brain-eye-body connection. At the Global Esports Federation, we certainly have that as our platform when we're talking about health and wellness. So vision health is highly important, because if, like Mo just said, you're on the screen for long periods of time. We then also talk about mental health, and we talk about the positive and the negatives of mental health. A lot of people automatically assume the negative about depression and social isolation and anxiety, but there are a lot of positive when it comes to the mental health side of gaming, especially during this pandemic. People have been able to connect in a way that they weren't able to before. Most people who are gaming, they're talking on their headset, and they could be talking to somewhere all the way around the world. So that social connection, the communication skills, there are a lot of key things that actually have a positive mental health spin when you're talking about gaming, creativity, all these things. We then talk about poor ergonomics, like Mo mentioned, just when you're seated incorrectly, your screen is set up differently. So we talk about that, and sedentary lifestyle. We certainly want to get people active. Sleep is a major issue when we're talking about the health and wellness of gamers. A lot of that has to do with the blue light that is emitting from the screen. And also, gamers keep very long hours. Nutrition is a big part, exercise, and then, of course, what we call musculoskeletal, or like the bone and muscle part, neck pain, shoulder pain, wrist pain, those types of things. So it is a lot that goes on when we look at the health and wellness perspective. A lot of people automatically just say, what do they have? Carpal tunnel? It's like that's the least of our worries when we are talking about health and wellness. I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation today.
You can just quickly, Lillian, if I may. So you can see Melita sort of brought it together to demonstrate that we need a holistic and a comprehensive health approach. And I think you just triggered my memory. There needs to be a bit of a cultural shift. So for a very long time, athletes in football, martial arts, basketball, baseball, etc., they would equate number of hours training with performance. And this was a very old school of sort of thinking. But in actual fact, it doesn't necessarily correlate one-to-one, because extended training increases your risk of injury, fatigue, and so forth. So you're finding now that people are training smart, with that same sort of analogy of working smart. And I think that needs to be a shift there with esports athletes, particularly those that are sort of spending these huge amounts of hours on the screens themselves. Thanks, Lillian.
Yeah. And Mo, you were just talking, I'm just going back, you were talking about the lack of research that is out there. And we certainly know that it is growing. In the past 2 to 3 years, we are starting to see more research in the area of health and wellness, certainly still lacking in the eye health, and more recently talking about safe listening, so ear and hearing health. And so what we do know by some of the research that is out there, that the shorter amount that you gain, the better your performance is. And the New York Institute of Technology has recently come out with an article, 6 minutes of a walk can actually improve your performance.
Wow.
A company called Vasario, led by a neuro-ophthalmologist, Dr. Kaiser Kaderi, he has a study with the visual index that is showing that after 4 hours of performance, at 4 hours after training, your performance goes down. So we are starting to get these numbers. The research is starting to come in. We believe in the science and the data and the numbers. So we are looking for more of that. I know we can get some of that from Plano as well.
That's great news. That's great news, Dr. Melitza, from your end. Well, indeed, what I hear, it says very holistic approach that needs to be put into this. Many involving aspects of one's eye, one's mental, physical health. Now, you both also mentioned about the early intervention and the importance of this early intervention. For the fact that their career may just end at as early as 22 or 24 when I just stepped into the working society in Singapore. So is the focus, or rather should the focus solely be on these esports athletes? Professor Mo?
Melissa, if I may, so when you go back to what I said earlier about the attractiveness of this as a sport, not just from a career, but an economic perspective, particularly with this huge following globally, whether you're in a developed or developing country, esports is the thing. And in actual fact, esports doesn't start when you see them on a headline. I said this earlier. It starts very early. So, you've got that 5-year-old that looks up at Cristiano Ronaldo and says, I want to become a football player. You're going to have these guys looking up to whoever it is and thinking, I need to be an esports athlete. So in actual fact, I believe there will be different programs, particularly from an education perspective, and intervention across the whole life journey. And I think that starts athlete or professional life. So in this case, when we're talking about eyes and behavior, I think it's incredibly important to intervene even during childhood years. And so that's at primary and secondary level. And we know, even if you're not a gamer and you're 2-year-old, you're spending more than 2 hours on screens. 6-month-year-olds are given 45 minutes of screen time just to sort of keep them as an additional sort of assistance for the parents as a nanny. And then when you're sort of 6 to 9 years old, you're spending equivalent to a work week on screens. These guys are not gamers.
So it is very common in Singapore, Dr. Melitza, right?
Wow, and it's a global issue. I mean, in Singapore, we have 3.5 devices per person. So that multiple devices is also an emerging issue. So I would say intervene early, have the athletes play a significant role as ambassadors and as leaders in the space, like a football player would sponsor a healthy diet or an energy drink. I think that esport athletes, and I'm being a bit biased here, should be, supporting eye health visits or, anti-glare glasses or good eye care behavior, outdoor activity, physical activity, and so forth. And I think if we intervene early, we're more likely to create that behavior change. Again, that will give us that longevity or greater longevity of the athletes' lives. So I would advocate different coordinated, specifically tailored programs with different age groups starting all the way at preschool years.
Well, that is great that you recommend that. We are certainly doing that at the Global Esports Federation. We have a program called Performance Plus, and actually Cristiano Ronaldo is one of our main role models for that program. But we have also partnered with UNESCO on this program called Fit for Life, which is a decade-long program, and it's doing exactly this, Mo. It's doing this early intervention, engaging the youth very early. And I think when we talk about it's really about education and awareness. And in esports, unlike traditional professional sports, there's not really a pipeline So, there's not a pipeline to professional esports athletes like there are in other sports. And so now that people are starting to game younger and younger, the average age of a gamer is 18 to 34, but that is certainly starting to shift younger. And we are seeing esports and gaming. Well, we were seeing gaming being used in primary and secondary school for education, at least here in the US we are. And so it is about education and awareness. And so I think as long as we can start to do that early, when we are starting to get this primary age person who is now on a game or on a device very young, it's the education awareness that I think will help to make the shift in that curve.
Well, good and well to both of you. And in view of this whole approach, can I just ask, how does adopting these healthy behaviors, especially at a young age that you mentioned, how does it translate to actual performance improvements? How does it help them to game better and, have more wins, for example?
Yeah. Well, we know that there's enough science to demonstrate the positive outcomes with good eye. Again, I'm being biased with the eye health element, but I'll give Melita the opportunity to talk about the different organs in the body. And we know that there's positive health outcomes with behavior changes pertaining to eye health. I want to quote X-Mithy, which is an esport athlete himself. And the reason I want to quote this is because really it's not just about Melita and I, it's the players actually requesting for some change. And his quote is, esports is a growing sport that is lacking a structured professional health support system. If a player is on a team with helpful staff and competing in a league that's well run and thoughtfully scheduled, there is a better chance that the esports athletes will play for longer. And that's X-Mithy. And I really like, because it almost summarizes this entire talk. And particularly when we have the support of athletes, I think we're more likely to be able to produce change. But from an eye health perspective, I think we need to take into account, because outdoor activity is protective for myopia and also allows for the distance viewing and the amount of UV light that's actually protective for eye health itself. We know from a physical activity perspective, WHO does have some stats that show that almost more than 80% of esports athletes are not adhering to the physical activity. That's a little bit higher than the general population itself, where I think it's just over 50%. And we know that there are some stats that Melita will probably talk about, where physical activity does increase your processing reaction time, cognition as well. And so we know that the top 10% of esports athletes actually engage in more physical activity than the remaining athletes. And so there's some emerging evidence to show that, even those that sort of engage in physical activity are less stressed, less fatigued. And so that's the mental health. I don't want to take too much of Melita's limelight there, but from an eye health perspective, you'll need a framework. And I don't want to go into the smaller details of the framework, but encouraging eye health behavior and making the athletes ambassadors and role models for this is absolutely critical. The second part, which Melita touched on, is education. There is a knowledge gap. So you can't be just pointing your finger at the athletes or the gaming developers or other stakeholders, but there is a gap in knowledge. And it's up to us to be able to fill this as educators and scientists and so forth, and really raise awareness there. And then encourage and incentivize outdoor activity, regular and timely eye exams. So early detection is the best form of prevention. Educating and implementing optical therapeutic and other interventions that will make sure that you alleviate these symptoms that are disruptive for their actually training and competition. Sleep and rest was mentioned before, the lighting conditions. And I think I'm not going to go into too much of the ergonomics, but that's a whole chapter in itself. So again, it's a framework, and it's one that's specifically tailored for different groups within the gaming industry, that is led by multiple stakeholders, with the esports athletes themselves being the role models for this.
And it's a comprehensive framework. And so everything that Mo was saying about eye health fits under a comprehensive framework. We don't want you just doing eye health. We certainly want you doing everything else that falls under this health and wellness umbrella. And so when we talk about outdoor activity, we know that physical activity and exercise helps with your mental health. It helps you sleep better at night. It helps you focus better. It helps you recover. And so when we are talking about people age 18 and over, you should be getting at least 30 minutes of exercise every day. And anyone 17 and beyond and under, they need at least 60 minutes of exercise a day. And that's just overall, that has nothing to do with gaming or esports. That's just having a healthy lifestyle. But then when you bring that into gaming and esports, where we know it's a sedentary lifestyle, it is all about performance. And when you're talking to an esports athlete, it's just about human performance. What can they do to make them game better, play better, win more? And I think when you tie health and wellness into performance, then that is really when the athletes start to listen. But I think, Mo, when you were quoting the esports athlete, that's at a professional level. And we want to talk about these 3 billion gamers worldwide. This is at the grassroots level. And certainly when we have gotten to the professional level, which is very interesting, now some of the esports professional teams are starting to take note that they do need full medical care. But that's a long way away, I think, meaning like in the next 2 to 5 years. Right now, a lot of teams may have a sports psychologist, which is great, but then there's no one else under that health umbrella. So I don't think we can wait for the professional level to do it. We certainly need to have this as a grassroots effort for the other, 90% that are not professional esports athletes. And so when we talk about key stakeholders, it is the esports athletes, the professional level, it is the gamers, it's the parents, it's the educators, and everyone else that's in the gaming space, because we are all key stakeholders here. And it starts with education and awareness, like we talked about. And so when you say this framework, we are moving towards, by having conversations like this, creating better, larger frameworks that are global, but certainly getting to the root and the grassroots of where we are from a gaming community.
And I think Melita, just to add to that, intervening early and creating this behavior change that is more likely to stick throughout your teenage and adulthood years. We also need to be planning for post-professional life. Yeah. You raise a really good point, because a lot of athletes, Olympians and so forth, are completely lost post-competition and also suffer from long-term health outcomes. So again, that intervention early is absolutely critical. I just wanted to raise that point. Eileen?
Well, wonderful inputs from your end. Very amazing insights we have received on our end. I mean, coming from what Dr. Melita said, professional level, there is the educational level, there's a grassroots level. I think a huge part of ownership also lies in the athlete himself or herself, that you have to take responsible for your actions and for your behaviors, definitely. Before we end off today's session, I just want to throw this to you both, now Professor Mo and Dr. Melita. Now, any last closing liner for all our athletes and gamers out there? Now, I really want both of you to stick to just one line, all right? Here we go, Professor Mo.
Well, I think with the digitalization moving so fast and the emerging concept of this metaverse, it's a race against time. And I think our coordinated and comprehensive approach has to start now.
We have talked about healthy digital lifestyles, but I also want to bring home the point of this is about fun. And you still need to have fun, be well, and stay inspired.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Melita, lovely to see you. Lillian, thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Big thank you to Professor Mo and Dr. Melita for such an engaging panel discussion today. We do hope that some of this insightful advice will go a long way into helping to shape the future of our esports athletes and gamers worldwide. Once again, thank you very much to Global Esports Federation for inviting us on board to contribute to some health initiatives that are in service to the esports community. And on behalf of Professor Mo and Dr. Melita, here's wishing everyone a fruitful 2022 ahead, most importantly, blessed with great health. Till we next meet.
I'm here in Singapore. If it's permissible, I must see you and everyone else from Global Esports.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for this panel. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.